Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jacqueline Dorsey of Lean Frontiers and I'll serve as your host today. I'm excited to bring to you today a short webinar on the lean supply chain facilitated by Tom Goldsby. This session will be recorded, so if you want to review it later, you can come back and refer to it. So for now, let me turn things over to Tom.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and good morning all. Pleasure to be with you. Always enjoy collaborating with the folks at Lean Frontiers. So this is a very short webinar, and as a professor, we like to be a little long-winded. So let me try to exert some discipline this morning. We'll get right into the topic. It's titled "Changing the Conversation About Lean in Transportation." So let's get going. So I think just something I have to say as we set out on the session is that I come to this as a professor of logistics. Logistics is my passion, and transportation in particular is an interest area of mine. And so I tend to be very pro-transportation. Many in lean, however, particularly lean manufacturers, tend to regard transportation as something of a waste, something to be minimized. And so my opening observations here, how do we view transportation, really comes to it from my personal perspective as someone that studies transportation closely and is an advocate of transportation. So these several points that you see on the screen really speak to my my admiration, if you will, for transportation, that it serves as the key linkage to our domestic and global economy. Transportation serves as the essential means of connecting people and nation, an efficient means of safe mobility, a primary input to quality of life, a well-paying source of income for many people, and it's also very big business. And my next slide then really speaks to some of these aspects that right here in the United States alone, this may be surprising to many of you, but freight transportation is a huge industry. As you know, you see the trucks go by you up and down our interstates, but businesses spent over $850 billion on freight transportation in 2013. That represented about 7% of U.S. GDP. What that means is about 7 cents out of every dollar spent here in the U.S. goes toward transportation. And if you were to include the cost that U.S. companies spent internationally, including shipments in country outside the United States, or in freight coming to or going from the United States, you know, this number would easily double. All right, so with regard to dollars spent in the United States, it's over $850 billion, and that was in 2013. We expect that number has continued to increase as our economy continues to warm up post the Great Recession. The next point says that government spends an additional 2.5% on freight transportation. That would include military transportation, but also some investments in infrastructure would go in here. And I won't get up on a soapbox this morning and talk about how I feel about our lack of investment in infrastructure, but it is crumbling, and we're not maintaining the infrastructure as we should. I'll leave it at that. But also, the transportation sector, transportation employs 4.3 million people in the private sector. I mentioned trucks going up and down the highways a moment ago, and we have 1.4 million people employed in the trucking industry as drivers. And I mentioned that our infrastructure is crumbling. However, we have the most comprehensive transportation infrastructure in the world, in that we use all 5 modes of transportation: truck, rail, water, air, and finally pipeline. And very few countries around the world make use of all 5 modes as we do, and that's a source of what we call comparative advantage. It's something that's very instrumental in how we compete in the global market. So given that I'm very fond of transportation, I've laid that out already and provided you with some stats that maybe this morning you're thinking, gee, I hadn't really thought of transportation in quite that light. This is the way most people view transportation, as something of a nuisance. We're experiencing more and more congestion every year. I don't know who measures this. Actually, I can tell you it's the folks at Texas A&M University, I think, that provide us with this little data point, that the average U.S. commuter wastes 38 hours per year in congestion, just in traffic, sitting, waiting. And unfortunately, that number is getting bigger and bigger every year. Transportation is also the biggest energy consumer. 93% of U.S. petroleum use goes toward transportation. That's about 13 million barrels each and every day. It's also a dirty polluter. It's the biggest contributor to carbon dioxide emissions, about 2 billion metric tons each year. It's also a source of hazard accidents, nearly 33,000 highway deaths each year in the U.S. Unfortunately, that number is going down because of, yes, legislation and crackdowns on drinking and driving, but also safer automobiles are helping to bring that number down. But in total, a lot of people see transportation as a necessary evil. If we want to connect 2 points and you know, the internet and data bits can't serve the purpose, we physically need to move product, well, transportation is the way to get that done. Now, with regard to that very first point, nuisance and congestion, I just wanted to provide a picture of what I'm talking about there, that what you see on this U.S. map is the U.S. interstate highway system in green, and the U.S. highways as well. And the areas then highlighted in red, as the legend indicates, are those where the demand on that roadway is exceeding the capacity. And so these are pockets of congestion, and this is actually a projection going out about 5 years from now, what the world will look like in 2020, but I would say we're already there really in 2015, because we're not adding new infrastructure to the network. And so your eyes are probably drawn to the Northeast as you look to New York and Philadelphia, and then stretching up into Boston. Basically, it means that entire corridor is over congested, but it's not limited to those highly populous areas. You look at the crossroads of America. I'm speaking to you today from Columbus, Ohio, and I can tell you that we are also facing severe congestion. That's why I'm working from home. I'm doing this webinar from home this morning. I looked out on the newscast. We got some rain this morning, and our highways were backed up. I decided I would broadcast from home this morning. So it's really impacting how we live our daily lives. And the point here is that it's not just limited to the cities, but the connection points are also being affected. If you look, for instance, at St. Louis, Missouri, you might expect it to be congested. You look at Kansas City, Missouri, it too is congested, but the entire corridor connecting, the I-70 corridor from St. Louis to Kansas City is shaded in red there. So that's what we're facing, and the little factoid there in the lower right comes to us from the Texas A&M Transportation Institute, that they found that congestion increased 7% year over year just a few years ago, and it's expected to continue to worsen as the economy heats up and more traffic is taking up our very static infrastructure. So let's transition a little bit to lean thinking. Given that background on transportation, I cast it in a positive light, and then I shed maybe a realistic, somewhat negative light on things. But let's look at lean. And this comes to us from Martochenko and Von Grabe, some friends of Lean Frontiers, a company called Lean Core. They wrote a book called Building the Lean Fulfillment Stream a few years ago. And they say that the lean supply chain is planned, stable, visible, and collaborative. The lean supply chain relentlessly focuses on lead time reduction, by eliminating all non-value creating activities. Well, that notion of value creation, value adding, is something that we're all very familiar with. And just for those that may not be quite so familiar, I'm going to borrow some language here from Womack and Jones, the classic lean thinking book, that says that a value adding activity is one that creates a benefit which the customer is prepared to pay. And so an activity adds value if it's something the customer cares about and, again, is explicitly willing to pay for it. If the activity physically changes the item in a meaningful way, again, I think we can refer back to the first point, that the customer cares about that change in the item. And then there's an and/or, the activity creates time and place utility for the customer. And by providing time and place utility, we mean that a product is available when and where the customer wants to consume it. So you're probably at this point getting a sense for where I'm going with the conversation. Transportation is not something that customers ordinarily say they care about explicitly, whether it's a business customer or a consumer, and it's not something that physically changes the item unless, of course, we damage the item in transit, and that's not something the customer welcomes. But this final point creates time and place utility for the customer. Now that's where transportation just might stand a chance as being regarded as a value-adding activity. Meanwhile, the non-value-adding activities are those whose elimination would lead to no reduction of the product or services attributes as seen by the customer. So it would not affect the performance, function, quality, or perceived value of the product if we were to eliminate that activity. However, many non-value-adding activities are necessary. We refer to these by different things. Sometimes they're referred to as business value add or essential non-value add. And even though they may be essential, we still seek to reduce, even if we can't entirely eliminate these activities. And I suspect all of you have engaged in value stream mapping, probably quite a bit of it. And you run into a lot of these essential non-value-added activities. These could be things related to safety or observing regulations. These are not things that customers see, appreciate, or are willing to pay for. However, you need to do things to protect your workforce and your team members. You need to do things that keep you from getting written up or sent to jail, right? So those would be regarded as business value added, and often we recognize transportation activities as being essential, but not value adding. So speaking of value stream maps, this is an extended value stream map, which means that we simply go beyond the four walls of our operation. We're looking upstream, downstream, beyond our internal operation. And in this case, you're looking this over and going, what kind of value stream is this? Well, I tried to come up with something pretty simple, and I realized that a surfboard does not have very many parts. And so in class, we did an extended value stream map for a surfboard. So it's got three basic supplies, and then it's a pretty simple product on the outbound side. And of course, leave it to the guy in Ohio to come up with a surfboard example, but we did the best we could. And often that inbound logistics, the transportation from suppliers to your internal assembly operation, that's regarded as a non-value add in the eyes of customers. Generally speaking, customers don't see this and they don't really appreciate it and they're not willing to pay for it. However, it is essential to flow those materials inbound to feed your production process. Meanwhile, on the outbound side, I've shaded this in green because customers do see the last mile delivery, as we call it, the outbound distribution of the physical product. And here, timeliness, reliability, damage-free delivery, these are all things that are very important. And also, if it's a critical item, beyond just those characteristics I just mentioned, the visibility of the movement has become increasingly more important. and that way we can kind of temper our own anxieties and maybe get a sense of comfort that while the product isn't here, it's on its way and will soon arrive. So we can often make the argument in our value stream maps that the outbound transportation to customers is something that they acknowledge, appreciate, and yes, in some cases are willing to pay more for, again, timeliness, meaning speed, reliability, visibility, damage-free delivery. However, the inbound piece, rarely seen, rarely understood, rarely appreciated. And my transition here is in the famous acronym or mnemonic tool that we often use to teach the 7 forms of MUDA. Many of you are probably familiar with Tim Wood, and I'm actually going to work from the bottom up. And when I say Tim Wood, some students go, don't you mean Tiger Woods? And no, I'm not talking about Tiger Woods, I'm talking about Tim Wood. And if we start at the bottom and make our way up, we're talking about defects, overproduction, overprocessing, waiting, motion, and that's usually motion inside the 4 walls of an operation, inventory, and yeah, finally, transportation. And in fact, in the Tim Wood acronym, the T term is the very first one, transportation. And so the focus on transportation as a form of waste kind of sets us up to say, let's not have transportation. Similarly, let's try to get by with as little inventory as possible, and on down the list. But the suggestion here in the title of my presentation this morning is that we just might be changing the conversation about transportation, that it's solely a waste, it's something to be reduced or even eliminated. And that's the question I pose at the bottom. How does transportation become more visible and value added to end customers? Well, I present 3 scenarios very quickly here. And the first one is one that all lean thinkers out there are very familiar with, just-in-time supply chains. That as we rely less on inventory, we shift responsibility to transportation. As we resort to small lot size, high frequency, getting away from batch flow to maybe something approaching one-piece flow, we get to more of a just-in-time environment. We don't rely on inventory, instead transportation. So that transportation has to be very reliable and adaptable, and not just fast. And that's something that I've learned in studying companies like Toyota and actually riding along with the truck drivers that serve Toyota is incredible discipline that we have in transportation. Certainly not to speed, but also to turn trucks around very quickly at supply locations, making great use of the cube capacity of the vehicle so that we have fewer trucks on the road. So certainly transportation takes on a greater emphasis in a JIT environment, and that's something that customers may appreciate, is that you're operating on a lean basis, and even though it's not the last mile delivery outbound from your operation, it may be something that's happening inbound that customers can appreciate if they too are lean thinkers. Scenario 2, now this is a little bit more focused on the business to consumer environment, internet retailing, and I suspect that we all engage in internet retailing, and our share of consumption through this means is growing, and that's the very first point, that the global market for internet retailing is about 1.5 trillion, and more than a third of that is right here in the US. And you see that internet retailing grew 16.7% in 2013. I was looking for a good, reliable number to see how much it grew in 2014, as it was expected to accelerate even faster than that 17% figure you see here. But you know, those of you that interface with retail know that conventional brick and mortar retailing is under attack, that more home shopping by virtue of the internet's taking place, and it's something that we're adapting to, and we're embracing ideas like omni-channel for reaching consumers in a multitude of ways. So what I suggest in the next point is that home delivery brings transportation decision-making in B2C commerce directly into the consumer's hands. In conventional retail, we build stores where we think the customer will find us, and then consumer logistics is left to the consumer just to drive to the store, fill up a shopping cart, load up the trunk, and drive home. However, this is changing, and it seems like Amazon is making news every day. Including this morning, I opened up the newspaper and they said that they're going to start hiring ordinary people to deliver packages to households. So the consumer is now starting to make transportation decisions, freight transportation decisions about the goods they buy, rather than just saying, you know, once a week I'm going to go to the store, fill up the shopping cart. They're now thinking very outwardly about how to move merchandise from a supply location to the home. Okay. And also returns factors in very significantly here too, where the online retailer may or may not have a brick and mortar presence, and so you might have to put a return in the mail in some form. So that returns policy factors very significantly in consumers' decisions to buy from a retailer online. So, and I mentioned, and there's the Amazon drone, which has been in the news quite a bit over the last year and a half, and the FAA is still making it a little bit difficult for Amazon and FedEx and some other folks talking about using these drones for package delivery. We'll see. I think at some point the FAA will probably relent a little bit, but I don't know. I don't think it's going. I think it's going to be more than a few years before we have these drones buzzing around the skies and landing on our front yards. Scenario 3 that helps to illuminate the importance of transportation, and this is true not only for consumers but also businesses, is concern for sustainability. Here this first point mentions consumers, that consumers increasingly care about energy consumption and carbon footprint, and as I indicated in the opening slides, transportation is the biggest consumer of energy, petroleum that is, and also the biggest contributor to carbon emissions. So the question is not only how can we make the products very sustainably and use sustainable materials, but how can we also transport in a sustainable manner? And like I said, I really believe that this is transferring not only from the consumer market, but it's also having an impact on businesses and how companies buy products and services. So the notion of being lean, green, and sustainable has always gone hand in hand. And in fact, in lean, we have tools, the value stream map being one very important tool, where we can start to not only think about time and inventory as critical metrics, but also things like emissions and energy consumption. And a lot of progressive companies are starting to factor these resources or these outputs, if you will, into their value stream maps. So I'm going to start kind of leading into some transition content here. And when we think about lean, and I've been a student of lean for the better part of 20 years now, and some of you I imagine have studied it for longer than I have, and I think we have to come to terms personally with what lean thinking is. If you run into someone in the street or in the hallway and they say, hey, what is this lean thing all about? You got to very succinctly explain to them what it's about. You know, it's nice if you could hand over a book, but they probably wouldn't read it. This is the way that I've explained what lean means to me. It means doing the right things right. And the right things are the things that create value in the eyes of customers. It's also the stuff for which we can make money, right? And when we can identify the things that create value in the eyes of customers, those are the things that customers are willing to pay for. And then we want to focus on how we can do them right. And when I mean right, I mean efficiently, how we can eliminate the waste in delivering that value. So as it relates to transportation, the question becomes, is transportation a right thing? And I think for a variety of reasons, not always, but in a variety of circumstances, it can be a right thing. As we embody some of the things that the scenarios presented talk about. Maybe it's in terms of employing JIT in our operations. Maybe it's in terms of getting involved in B2C commerce. Maybe it's in terms of trying to be a more sustainable participant in the economy. Well, transportation, for a variety of reasons, is one of those things that we'll continue to rely upon. Not everything can be converted into data bits and transported, and we don't have Scotty's teleportation device from Star Trek to beam pallets of product from one place to another. And so I really think that transportation is very much in the spotlight today that it hasn't been in the past. In some ways because we rely on it more, in other ways because it's becoming more challenged. I don't have the benefit of asking for a show of hands here, but I suspect some of you were probably affected by the West Coast port closure that happened earlier this year. And think about how that impacted your operations, how it impacted your ability to serve your customers. Now that's something that was out of sight and out of mind for most Americans. However, it impacted most Americans in some way. Maybe it resulted in some empty store shelves. Maybe it resulted in paying a little bit more for product. Maybe they detected that or not. But it certainly was a challenge for companies that rely on international supply or companies that are serving international markets. And so and then in another way, we struggle with the roadways. You know, we see orange barrels and we see decrepit roads, and you know, we realize that 16% of all bridges in this country are structurally deficient. That's something for you to think about on your drive home tonight. But the infrastructure is crumbling, and maybe we shouldn't take it for granted. So getting back to this question, is transportation the right thing? Well, if we don't put emphasis on it, it can very easily become a very bad thing. And we need to figure out how to leverage what capabilities we have maybe to gain benefit. So the question then becomes, how do we do it right? And I'm looking at my clock here, and I try to be very disciplined. And I think I've wrapped up inside of my 30 minutes. It's really hard to begin and close out a fairly complex topic in that amount of time. With that in mind, I've got a lot of contact information here, a lot of different ways to reach me. I might highlight my email address there, goldsby.2@osu.edu. I'm also very active in LinkedIn and have started tweeting recently. So a lot of different ways you can connect with me. If there's anything that you've seen or heard this morning that has provoked some thought, I would really welcome hearing from you. And email there is probably the best way to make that happen. So I think in an effort to kind of close out inside my 30 minutes, respect your time, I thank you very much, and would love to hear from you if there's something that sparked interest.
All right. Well, Tom, thank you for facilitating our session today. As mentioned previously, today's webinar is being recorded, so look for an email following our time together for a link to the recording. Feel free to share this throughout your organization. So again, thank you, Tom, and thanks to each of you for participating in today's session. Goodbye.
Okay, it's in the can, huh?